At 62, I had pretty much perfected the art of being overlooked, and I don't mean that in a poetic way. I mean it literally, the kind of man people pass on the sidewalk without registering, a black veteran with a limp, a quiet voice, and a habit of keeping his head down. And for a long time, that felt like survival, like the safest way to live after everything I'd seen, because when you've watched how fast things can go wrong, you learn to stay small. You know what I mean? That worked right up until the morning. My front window exploded, and a man on a loudspeaker started calling my name like it was already on a file somewhere. Renee was still half asleep beside me when I heard boots on grass. Too many boots moving like they'd practiced it, and my chest tightened in that familiar way I hadn't felt in years. Not fear exactly, more like recognition. Then the voice came again, calm and sharp. Caleb Moore, Renee Moore, Federal Task Unit. Exit the residence immediately. And Renee sat up, confused, scared, asking me what was happening. And I remember looking at her face and thinking how unfair it was that this moment had found us after all the quiet years. Before I could answer, the flashbang went off, light and sound ripping through the house, smoke everywhere, Renee screaming, my ears ringing so hard it felt like my head might split. Someone yelling, "Don't move a boot," slamming into my back when I tried to stand, plastic cuffs clicking somewhere close. Renee stumbled out onto the porch, disoriented, blood running from her ear, calling my name, and then, yeah, that happened. One of them fired a taser. I watched the wires hit her chest, watched her body lock up and collapse, and something inside me snapped clean in half. I pushed up. Despite my knee screaming, felt a red laser dot settle over my chest. Time slowing down the way it does right before everything changes, and I stopped, stood up straight, and said the 5 words I'd sworn I'd never say out loud. I still have the Atlas file. You could feel the shift instantly, like the air itself had changed. One of them froze, another raised his hand, radios crackled. Someone asked for confirmation. There was a pause that felt like forever, and then the order came down softer than before. Stand down medical for the woman, no arrests. And just like that, the whole operation unraveled. I dropped to my knees next to Renee, ignoring everyone else telling her to stay with me, promising it would be okay, even though I didn't know if that was true. And across the street, I saw phones out, lights on a kid from the neighborhood filming, because once people see something like that, it doesn't really belong to you anymore. The thing is, I didn't want to be a symbol or a warning or any of that. I just wanted the life we'd built, the small one, the quiet one, the one where I mentored kids at the rec center and fixed broken fences for neighbors who couldn't afford a contractor, where Renee ran her little wellness group and honestly believed that helping people heal was enough to balance the scales. I believed it too, or at least I wanted to, and that's why when a black SUV started parking down the block every afternoon, same spot, same time, I told myself it was nothing. Even when Renee said it wasn't, even when the footage showed it sitting there 45 minutes on the dot, because coincidences don't keep schedules like that. The pressure crept in quietly after that. Renee's nonprofit data wiped clean, overnight backups gone, tech support saying it had to be someone with professional skills, a man in a city uniform showing up to inspect zoning violations, even though his truck had no insignia and his eyes scanned the house like he'd been inside before. And I knew what it was, intimidation dressed up as bureaucracy, the kind of thing you don't report because you can't quite prove it. What Renee didn't know then, what almost no one knew, was that I'd brought something back from the war that never made it into any report, something I buried because I thought silence was safer than truth. On my last deployment, my unit arrived too late to stop something we weren't supposed to see: contractors in unmarked gear. Civilians lined up orders that didn't have names attached. And in the chaos, I copied files from a commander's laptop, video logs, authorizations, proof of things nobody wanted to acknowledge. I buried one drive in the desert, kept another close, and told myself it was insurance, not a weapon, something I'd only use if everything else failed. Then they tased my wife on our own porch. At the hospital, they tried to keep me from Renee doctor's orders. They said, eyes sliding away from mine. And hours later, an old friend from my unit slipped into the room dressed like a chaplain, leaned close, and told me they knew I still had it. That saying its name had bought time, not safety, and pressed a key into my palm. Storage unit paid for 20 years, everything you might need. When we got home, the house was too clean. Windows replaced furniture, shifted just enough to notice a message without words. And that night, Marcus, a teenager I'd mentored, showed up shaking, told me he'd filmed the raid, and he wasn't the only one. The footage spread, questions followed, and a local cop, Officer Lena Brooks, reached out because she'd been ordered to watch me, labeled a potential domestic threat, and she knew it was nonsense, no warrant, no report, like the whole thing had never officially happened. That's when it hit me. This wasn't about arresting me, it was about erasing me. With Marcus and a quiet, brilliant kid named Ethan who knew his way around encryption, we cracked parts of the Atlas file, names, coordinates, facilities that didn't officially exist. Black sites not overseas but here. And what we found wasn't history. It was active. Renee stopped asking me to hide, then told me no more secrets, that if they were willing to drag this into our home, into her body, we weren't burying it again. We tried journalists first, stories vanished, editors went silent, servers wiped, so we went to the families, quiet packages with evidence tied to their losses. Enough truth to spark questions that couldn't be dismissed, and the movement grew faster than I expected along with the danger. Someone cut Renee's brake lines. A bullet cracked a fence post inches from my head one night, and then Officer Brooks disappeared. We traced her to a rural compound tied to one of the names in the file, and a handful of old veterans people long dismissed as broken or obsolete moved with a precision that never really leaves. You got her out and took everything we could. That's when Renee found her maiden name in an old funding document years before we met, processed budgets for special projects she'd never been told the purpose of, and the guilt nearly crushed her, but I told her the truth. None of us saw the whole picture. That's how systems like that survive. The answer wasn't another leak. It was all of it at once, and Marcus spent weeks cutting a documentary while Ethan built mirrored releases across dozens of countries, and when it dropped, it couldn't be contained. Executives denied, then resigned, politicians deflected, then vanished, protests filled streets, hearings followed, arrests came slower than they should have, but they came, and one night in a hotel parking garage, an assassin waited. And I found him first, told him he wasn't the first they'd sent, but he could be the first to talk, and by morning he was in custody. Months later, our neighborhood threw us a cookout, a banner stretched across the street saying, "Truth lives here. Renee's recovery slow, but real new treatments, following new laws." And I went back to the rec center, still mentoring, still quiet, just not invisible anymore. One winter afternoon, a young boy knocked on our door with a notebook and said his teacher told him we were heroes. And Renee and I just looked at each other because we'd never wanted a fight. We just refused to stay silent when silence became complicity, and that part makes people uncomfortable. So, here's what I want to ask you if you had the truth, and it scared powerful people. Would you bury it, or would you say 5 words and let everything change? Tell me what you think in the comments. Argue with me if you want. Share a story, if you've seen something like this yourself, because these stories don't matter unless we talk about them. And if you're still here, like the video, subscribe, and don't make yourself invisible for anyone.